Hey guys, Matt Smith back here with you. Week 4 SEC recap this morning on a day when I don't think we thought there'd be a lot of surprises. Didn't have a ton of big games on the schedule. It was a pretty crazy day, especially that late afternoon window throughout the country. So we'll go through all the games. We had 8 in the SEC yesterday, a couple surprises, a couple went pretty much as we all expected. So I'll start. I kind of want to start with what I thought was maybe the game of the year so far, Missouri and Boston College. Because it's just Missouri and Boston College and not, say, Auburn versus Penn State. It's probably not going to get as much love as it deserved. But what a wonderful game. Back and forth, contrast of styles between Missouri's passing game, Boston College's strong rushing game, even without quarterback Phil Jurkovec. The Eagles moved the ball pretty well against that Missouri front seven, which is becoming a legitimate concern, I think, going forward for the Tigers. That was a one-score game or a tie game for all but about 3 minutes. In the third quarter, when BC had a brief 10-point lead, Missouri came back to take the lead. BC went ahead with 25 seconds to go. Missouri's chubby kicker, 56-yard field goal, tied it at the gun, went about 56 and a half yards, just cleared the upright. BC scores it overtime, and Missouri throws an interception by Connor Bazelak to start their possession in overtime. Boston College wins. They go to 4-0. Missouri falls to 2-2. They were hoping for a split of those first two road games against Kentucky and BC. Didn't get either. And now head home for a couple winnable games against Tennessee and North Texas. They're going to need to get both of them. Must regroup quickly. Tennessee's okay. They'll come to Columbia thinking they can win the game, and Missouri needs a good effort, again, particularly from that front seven, which is pretty concerning. Offense, not too worried about. They're moving the ball pretty well. BC's defense is solid, and they put up 30-some points yesterday. So good effort from them, but really just a great game, fun to watch. Again, the contrast of styles, two really good coaches I like, and Eli Drinkwitz and Jeff Hafley, and a fun game to start the day up there in Chestnut Hill. To the game that had the most hype going into it, A&M and Arkansas. I thought A&M would withstand some of that Arkansas ground attack, and they really couldn't do it. From KJ Jefferson running the ball, he did a lot of the work. A.J. Green, Devion Warren doing their thing. The Hogs were able to run the ball almost as well as they did against Texas. The defense was even better than I thought it would be against Zach Calzada. And right now that Aggies offense is just not making plays. You had the long touchdown run there by Spiller, which was their really only big play of the game. I think it was their only run that went for more than 10 yards on the day, as crazy as that sounds. But I sound like a broken record with Barry Odom's defense. Again, he puts his players in such great positions. They're mostly a bend but don't break unit, but they are getting some pressure with 4, and they just let nothing get behind them. Let that ball Arkansas secondary make plays. You saw it yesterday with that interception that pretty much ended it for A&M. Arkansas went down and got a field goal to go up by 10 late, and that pretty much ended things. So Arkansas 4-0. Can't say enough about the job Sam Pittman and that staff does week in, week out. Texas A&M, again, just not enough explosion in that offense, whether that's because of Calzada in for Haynes King, whether that's because of the receivers just not making plays, whether it's because of the dip in offensive line play. Definitely had some protection issues yesterday. A&M's got a lot to work on. They'll play Mississippi State next week, which is a nice breather, we would think. That's a pretty good state defense, so you wouldn't think it's going to get that pointsy, meaning it's a close, low-scoring game, and a couple of mistakes there from the offense, a couple of busted plays. Maybe you could give the Bulldogs a chance there. So State next week, then Alabama, then Missouri and South Carolina in kind of their light stretch. But the Aggies have a lot more losses coming this year. That offense is just a mess right now. That's a theme throughout college football this year. Early on, we've seen teams that we've come to expect solid offensive play from, whether it's A&M, Oklahoma, Notre Dame, Wisconsin's ground game. All those offenses have some significant issues. That's why we're seeing so many unders win. And the gambling lines, it's just been a crazy start to the season. No more so with the A&M offense being really junky right now. But again, full credit to Arkansas. 4-0, the schedule only gets tougher from here. At Georgia, at Ole Miss. Auburn comes to town. Still got to go to Alabama and LSU in November. So just a crazy tough slate for the Hogs. But what a fun ride it's been in the first month. And they should just enjoy this. They'll lose a couple games here and there. But for right now, they're going to be a top 10 team today. And again, just an incredible job by Sam Pittman, by KJ Jefferson, by his staff to get the Hogs to a place where they can pretty much dominate both Texas and Texas A&M, barely a year removed from a 20-game SEC losing streak. Crazy. LSU-Mississippi State, the other key swing game in the SEC West. LSU jumped out early, made some big plays. Kayshon Boutte, touchdown leader in the country, such a playmaker, maybe the best receiver in the country right now. And that mask, the running game, still not working for LSU. And that is just a major red flag as they head into the meat of conference play now with Auburn, Kentucky, Florida, Ole Miss coming up in October. Still a very imbalanced offense. Max Johnson just taking a lot of hits behind that shaky offensive line. You worry about him taking a big hit at some point, especially with Miles Brennan likely still unavailable for a little while longer. That Mississippi State defense played well. Offense, again, could just knock it out of its own way. Had an early fumble, had an early interception, allowed LSU to take an early 7-3 lead, build it, had to hold on late. So that State offense also, kind of like A&M's, is pretty junky. Just no explosive elements to that right now with Will Rogers. He's throwing it 50, 60 times a game. But his yards per attempt's like usually 5 or 6, and that's just not good enough to win games in this league when you're not running the ball very well. So another tough loss for Mississippi State. Again, LSU's defense, I think, is rounding into form nicely heading into the tough part of their schedule. Butte's a stud. Johnson's a tough as nails quarterback, but if they can't run the ball, there's probably multiple losses coming up here in October. Still have Alabama, A&M, and Arkansas to come in November. So it's SEC West life. And if you have a weakness, it's going to get exposed. And that's my concern for LSU, is that lack of a running game, lack of balance on offense is going to come back to bite them here during October. Let's see, Tennessee, Florida. Vols hung around. I mean, I thought Josh April had a pretty good game plan to attack Todd Grantham's defense. They're just not executing well enough with the quarterbacks. Had a couple big plays, but overall, just not making plays. Some bad clock management decision late in the first half there when Tennessee had a chance to get a field goal and tie it. Ended up missing a long field goal when they probably should have gotten closer. So a decent effort from the Vols. They're doing what Heupel wants them to do. They're going up tempo. They're throwing it deep. They don't give a damn about time of possession, and that's what we expected from Tennessee this year. I think they'll give somebody a game. It won't be Georgia or Alabama, but maybe it's Ole Miss, maybe it's Kentucky, someone who they probably shouldn't compete with. They'll give them a game and give them a chance to steal it. So overall, fairly impressed with the effort from Tennessee. Their run defense, as I said in the preview video, the numbers look good, but they had not been tested, and Florida was no match. They ran right through them, had nearly 300 yards on the ground for the Gators, again, building on that nice performance against Alabama. And Todd Grantham's defense, again, took some early punches. Tennessee led that game 14-10, and that was it for the scoring, kind of like they did against Alabama last week. In that middle part of the game, that Gators defense really clamped down. So nice strides from that unit, kind of like LSU. The schedule is really going to get tough now in October. They got to go to Kentucky next week. They got to go to Baton Rouge in a couple weeks, and of course Georgia at the end of the month. So 3-1, what we expected from Florida. Again, that great performance against Alabama to keep that thing close. I think we're pretty bullish on them and looking forward now. Can they win those 2 road games to get to Jacksonville with a shot against a presumably still undefeated Georgia, where they could win that game, get the tiebreaker, and have first place in the SEC East. So that's the goal for the Gators now, survive those 2 road games. They're both going to be tough. Kentucky's solid. LSU, again, at least defensively, is rounding into form. So a fun few weeks ahead here for the Gators as they try to set their sights on Jacksonville to make that game a huge game and not just a traditional rivalry game. Kentucky, South Carolina, also kind of what we expected. 16-10 Wildcats went back to their bread and butter on the ground after airing it out a good bit last week against Chattanooga. Turnovers still a problem for Kentucky. 3 more last night, 2 fumbles, 1 interception. That's how South Carolina stayed in games and won won their game against East Carolina. How they hung around last night despite having only 215, 220 yards on offense. They're forcing turnovers, and Kentucky's making mistakes. And that's fine against Missouri, against ULM, against Chattanooga. But again, with Florida, with LSU, with Georgia coming up, they have got to play cleaner football because they're a pretty solid team. They run the ball well. They're good on defense. Will Levis can give you enough in the passing game with a guy like Wan'Dale Robinson to threaten the Gators, threaten LSU. But if they're fumbling the ball away, giving teams short fields, it's not going to go well for the Cats. So I like their makeup, but they have got to play cleaner football as the schedule toughens here in October. Alabama, no problems with Southern Miss. Bryce Young, really great stat line. 5 touchdowns, 2 incompletions. Did have his first interception of the season. But he's rolling. Might have the 2 best quarterbacks in the country coming up next week with Young and Matt Corral dueling in that showdown in Tuscaloosa. Can't wait for that one. Not much more to say about the Tide rolling with ease last night. And then there's Auburn. Should have lost that game to Georgia State. Needed a blocked punt that they recovered in the end zone. Needed a 4th down, kind of a miracle play from TJ Finley after he came off the bench to replace a struggling Bo Nix. Had to break out of what looked like a game-ending sack. found Shedrick Jackson in the end zone. Auburn holds on, gets a pick six from a smoke six, if you'll call it now, from Smoke Monday, kind of the king of the pick sixes, with another one to wrap that game up yesterday, 34-24. Not a 10-point win by Auburn in reality. They were losing by 2 scores for most of the second half. Got some big plays late, and Auburn Magic wins out again. But boy, a lot of concerns there. The front seven was a mess. Georgia State ran all over them. And really just a disappointing performance. What do they do at quarterback now? Does TJ Finley go back to Baton Rouge next week, start against his former team LSU? Do you go back to Bo Nix playing in a hostile road environment like Tiger Stadium late at night? I don't know. Interesting week ahead for Brian Harsin, but that was pretty alarming for Auburn and what we thought would be a flat spot, but not that ugly of an effort from the Tigers on Saturday. And Georgia-Vandy, I think, wraps us up. 62-0. Vanderbilt so far to go under Clark Lee. 35-0 right away. 77 total yards for the Commodores. There's just really not much more that needs to be said. That program's as bad as any I've seen in my lifetime in the SEC right now. Derek Mason completely wrecked it. Georgia defense is as good as any defense I've seen in this league in my 30 years watching football. Bring those two together, you get 62-0, and that was a game not even worth paying attention to yesterday. Easy September schedule for Georgia, as we all thought, coming out of the Clemson game, but now some fun ones ahead with Arkansas, Auburn, Kentucky, and Florida in October. That wraps up the look around the SEC. Again, only 8 games yesterday with conference play wrapping up. But nationally, wild and crazy day. That 3:30 Eastern window, as those games were winding down, it got crazy. You can have 3 or 4 games on at the same time and feel like you're still missing something. So Clemson, obviously, probably the biggest story. Offense still struggling, losing in overtime to NC State. Thought NC State was going to do what they always do and blow a game at the end. Missed a short right down the middle field goal attempt at the end of regulation to send that game to overtime. NC State scored, and Clemson lost it on downs. DJ with a couple misfires there in Clemson's overtime possession. 2-2, first ACC loss, not counting the Notre Dame quasi-conference loss last year since 2017 at Syracuse. 2-2. Forget even talking about college football playoff hopes now for that team. They're slim as is, but are they going to win their last 8 games the way that offense is playing? I don't think so. So defensive injuries starting to pile up, and it could be a long season for Clemson. It was a heck of a run, but I think that playoff streak is certainly going to end after 6 seasons as they take a loss in ACC play yesterday in Raleigh. Other side of the conference, North Carolina, you thought, all right, they bounced back from that opening loss to Virginia Tech, popped Virginia last week. Then they go to Atlanta and play Georgia Tech, who lost to Northern Illinois. Gave Clemson a pretty good game last week, but still had no offense, and Georgia Tech puts 45 on them. So blowout win for the Jackets. ACC is a complete topsy-turvy mess right now. Wake Forest looks good. BC looks pretty good. Louisville looks pretty good since that week 1 loss to Ole Miss. Maybe Clemson gets it together. Virginia Tech still without a league loss. They play Notre Dame in a couple of weeks. That'll be a fun test there. Pitt, God only knows. They lost to Western Michigan, but you know they have a good quarterback in Kenny Pickett. So that now it's always the Coastal. It's always chaotic, but this year it could be both divisions. So hard to write anyone off in the ACC except maybe Florida State, who dropped to 0-4 yesterday. Still, again, just stunning to see that record in that team, even as inconsistent and below average as FSU has been for the last 4 or 5 years. 0-4 is still stunning to see. Louisville built a big lead yesterday in Tallahassee. Had to hang on late, but pretty much controlled that game. So nice road win for them. And again, it's going to be a wild ride in the ACC. Maybe we get Boston College versus Pitt in the ACC title game. I don't know at this point. Anything's on the table for that conference. Crazy first month in the ACC. Let's jump to the Big 12. Oklahoma, again, surviving. Their third one-score win in Norman this season after beating Tulane and Nebraska. Never led against West Virginia until that clock said 0. Walk-off field goal from Gabe Burkich after West Virginia was driving. Had some snap issues. I believe they had a false start and then a snap that was that Jared Dickey was not ready for. Had it end up like a 4th and 30 and had to punt. Oklahoma drove down, ran the clock down, kicked a field goal and won it. But again, Spencer Rattler struggled. You had some chance for Caleb Williams there at Memorial Stadium last night. Kind of a toxic atmosphere there. So I don't know what to expect from this Oklahoma team going forward. Certainly do not expect them to run the Big 12 without a loss. Got to go to Kansas State next week. Their arch nemesis, who's beaten them the last 2 times. So I don't know. Just quite a mess for the Sooners. Defensively, they played pretty well. They're holding up for the most part against opposing offenses outside of the second and third quarter, kind of slip against Tulane, but did pretty well against Nebraska. did pretty well against West Virginia. So at least that side of the ball is playing well, but offensively, still kind of a mess there for OU. What else in the Big 12? Big win for Baylor, beating Iowa State in battle of the conference champion last year in the regular season against an unbeaten Bears team. Treston Ebner, huge kick return to put a one-score game into a two-score game in the fourth quarter. Baylor holds on late, gets a stop on a two-point conversion. And Iowa State, again, a rough September. They're sitting there at 2-2. Can't write them off from Big 12 title contention, knowing their history. But real nice start to the season for Dave Aranda and the Bears in year 2 with that 4-0 start. They'll go to Oklahoma State next week. Really fun game in Stillwater. Big 10, Notre Dame, Wisconsin, crazy game early. Started out a lot like that Penn State-Wisconsin game in week 1. 2 bad offenses, 2 really good defenses, getting pressure on the quarterback, shutting down the run game. Wisconsin gets a turnover, takes a 13-10 lead to start the fourth quarter. Chris Tyree runs the kickoff back for Notre Dame, and the floodgates open. A couple more interceptions, I believe 3 more for the Notre Dame defense after that. 2 pick sixes. When it's all said and done, it was 41-13 Notre Dame. Certainly a much more competitive game than that. 41 points makes you think Notre Dame's offense played well. They did not. Jack Cohn ended up getting hurt. Drew Pine came off the bench and led a touchdown drive, the one that made it a 2-score game and pretty much sealed the deal for the Irish. So I don't know what they're going to do at quarterback now. If Cohn's healthy, he's probably the guy, but they've been using their freshman Tyler Buckner, who's more of a change-of-pace running option. He was unavailable yesterday with a hamstring injury, but Pine looked really solid and steady, gave off some Ian Book vibes. So kind of like Auburn, interestingly, get the quarterback position for Notre Dame as they prepare for Cincinnati. But Wisconsin, Graham Mertz, sophomore quarterback, reminds me a lot of Kenny Hill, who had that great start to his freshman year at A&M and then just free fell. And we're seeing that with Mertz now. 4 interceptions yesterday, again, 3 in the fourth quarter. Wisconsin 2-2 now. They'll go home to play Michigan. A lot of regrouping to do in Madison, or this season could really get away from them if they don't figure some things out offensively. Michigan State, both not overly impressive yesterday. Crazy play in the Nebraska-Michigan State game. Nebraska punted it to the left. Michigan State's punt return team all went to the right. Fooled the Nebraska coverage team. Punt actually went to the left. It was caught. He had an open lane, 40-yard touchdown, ran it back to tie the game late in the fourth quarter. Very heady play and continuing just really good coaching from Mel Tucker and that Spartan staff. Went to overtime. Adrian Martinez threw a pick. Michigan State kicked the field goal to win it. And that was a classic Nebraska loss. Again, they're so close. They're right there, but they just can never get over the hump. Is that a Scott Frost problem? You kind of think it has to be at this point. You just don't trust him in those key situational moments of games. And Nebraska now 2-3, going back home to play Northwestern and Michigan in their next 2 games. They probably need to get both of them because, again, Iowa, Ohio State, Wisconsin, Minnesota still on the schedule. If they want to go to a bowl, probably need to get both of those games. So this was the key stretch for them, the start of it at least. Took a loss. Now can they go back to Lincoln and win a couple of games? Again, they're good enough. They're right there. They go to Oklahoma, lose by 7. Go to Michigan State, lose in overtime. They can compete with pretty much everybody, not named Alabama or Georgia right now, but they're just not finishing games. And they got to figure out a way to do that here. And it should be long past time for that in year 4 under Frost. Iowa was pretty flat against Colorado State. I'm sorry, against, Colorado State. Kent State was last week. So logical. They had a couple tough games, obviously, to start the season. Big Ten play ramps up next week with at Maryland on a Friday, so short week ahead. Penn State comes to town after that. So classic flat spot, but they were losing at halftime. We've seen this in the past from Iowa teams, so it's not totally shocking, but pretty ugly performance against the team that lost to Vanderbilt earlier this year. I'll wrap it up with the Pac-12, I guess. USC, again, second straight home game. Can't blame it on Clay Helton anymore. They were blasted, ran off the field by Oregon State late last night in the Coliseum. 45-27, I believe, was the final. It was over late in the third quarter. USC had an early lead, but then after that, Oregon State just ran up and down the field, dominated the line of scrimmage. Chance Nolan, a really nice quarterback. And I thought Oregon State had a chance. They're a nice team. They're probably going to go to a bowl. But you're USC. You're playing at home. Got some momentum back last week with a 45-14 win at Washington State, and they just laid a massive egg again. So USC all over the map. Clay Helton's gone. Can't blame him now, but that program, boy, do they need a restart coming up here in the offseason. That's embarrassing to play Stanford and Oregon State at home and the game be completely decided by the third quarter. That's pathetic. But again, good effort from the Beavers. They're 3-1, and they got a chance to make some noise here in a pretty wide open Pac-12. UCLA, nice bounce back win at Stanford. That late emotional loss to Fresno last week. Had to go to Palo Alto, played a Stanford team, excited to be back home for the first time all year. Blew an early lead. Stanford came back and tied it, but UCLA locked it down in the fourth quarter. 35-24 win for the Bruins. Really nice effort there. And now potentially a Pac-12 South title game. Hard to say that this earlier in the year. But Arizona State and UCLA clearly look like the two best teams in the Pac-12 South. They'll meet next Saturday at the Rose Bowl. So pretty fun one there between Jane Daniels and hopefully a healthy Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who got banged up a bit last night for the Bruins. Oregon flat against Arizona. That game was closer than it should have been in the fourth quarter. Pulled away late to win, I think, by 22 or so. So Ducks were fine, but kind of have some injury issues on defense. Again, kind of a flat spot for them as well. Arizona stinks, hasn't won a game in more than 2 years. Still on that high of the Ohio State game. But again, as we saw with teams like Oregon State playing pretty well, UCLA pretty well. They got to go to Stanford next week. They need to lock this down or there's losses coming. And that win at Ohio State could be rendered not meaningless, but it could be forgotten pretty quickly here if they drop a game or two in the Pac-12. So good effort from the Ducks, but still some concerns about navigating even a pretty weak Pac-12. And a couple G5 things. SMU takes the Iron Skillet again, second year in a row. They win in Fort Worth against TCU, staying perfect after that Hail Mary win last week over La Tech. So good job there by Sonny Dykes, who's possibly angling for another shot at a Power 5 job. UTSA, a guy definitely has a Power 5 head coaching job in his future, Jeff Traylor. Spotted Memphis a 21-0 lead on the road yesterday. Came back and won at 31-28 on a walk-off field goal. Battle of unbeaten teams there goes to UTSA. Roadrunners and probably UAB look like the two best teams in Conference USA. They'll meet later in the season. And I think both are viable group of 5 New Year's 6 contenders should something happen to Cincinnati, who again goes to Notre Dame next week for probably their biggest game in program history. Top 10 right now, a couple changes. I have Oklahoma at number 10, dropped them down a spot or two after another ugly performance, but they survived it. Florida holding steady at number 9. Notre Dame up to number 8 after the big win over Wisconsin. I have Ole Miss at 7, leapfrogged by Arkansas, who goes to number 6 after that win over Texas A&M. Oregon still at 5. Again, not a great performance last night, but hard to say there's a much better win in the country than what they did in Columbus 2 weeks ago. Penn State at 4, Iowa at 3. Again, flip them however you want. Both have 2 really nice wins. And then obviously Georgia 2, Alabama 1. Clearly the 2 teams that have separated from the rest of the pack. Between 3 and about 15 or 16, I don't see much of a difference. I think all those teams could beat each other on any given day. So we'll see if someone emerges as a number 3 team in the country. But right now it's Alabama, Georgia, and the whole rest of the pack in what's been a pretty wild September as we start to try to figure out who's good, who's average, who's great, and so forth. So as I said in the preview video this week, these first 2 weekends of October are awesome, and next week is a loaded slate. Starting out early with Arkansas and Georgia, probably a top 10 matchup there in Athens to start the day. Fascinating Michigan-Wisconsin game in Madison. Is Michigan for real? They hit the road for the first time. Is Wisconsin completely broken, or can they regroup like we've come to expect from the Badgers? I don't know. Tough call there, but an interesting game in Madison. Big game in the ACC early as well with Louisville and Wake Forest. Later in the day, late afternoon, the 2 huge ones, probably Ole Miss and Alabama is your CBS game. An hour before that, we got Cincinnati and Notre Dame in South Bend over on NBC. So 2 battles of unbeatens there. Oregon, Stanford in that window as well. And then Oklahoma at Kansas State. Can the Wildcats make it 3 in a row over the Sooners? So again, looks like a really loaded late afternoon window next Saturday. Primetime window, Florida, Kentucky. Fascinating game there. Gators haven't lost in Lexington in about 35 years. Kentucky's 4-0, going to be charged up for that one. Should be an awesome atmosphere for a night game up there in the Bluegrass. Indiana, Penn State's your ABC primetime game. Indiana slipped by Western Kentucky last night. Not a great performance. Very skeptical of them. They haven't really put a complete game together. Michael Penix does not look like he's all the way back from his ACL. They did beat Penn State last year. Probably won't be quite as electric of an atmosphere in State College as it was for Auburn a couple weeks ago. But I think Penn State should be a sizable favorite there when the Hoosiers come to State College. And BC Clemson also next week. Can BC get to 5-0? Will Clemson find some offense and bounce back? Interesting game there. Remember, BC had them on the ropes last year before a furious late rally by the Tigers to stay undefeated last year. So interesting game there in Death Valley. And late night, the one I mentioned earlier in the Pac-12, Arizona State, UCLA. Again, Colorado's bad, Arizona's bad, Utah doesn't look great this year, USC's a mess. So it kind of looks like the winner of that game in the Rose Bowl will definitely have the inside track to the Pac-12 championship game. So fun one there. Again, two really good quarterbacks to watch in Jane Daniels and Dorian Thompson-Robinson. There we go. Week 4 recap in the books. I will be back on Wednesday to preview a really fun Week 5. The SEC schedule is loaded from start to finish. Again, Arkansas, Georgia at noon. We got Auburn, LSU late night at 9 o'clock Eastern. So full 12 hours of craziness, I would think, in the SEC next week. And again, a number of huge national games. So October is always so much fun. We think we know what we know right now, but we probably don't. So more curveballs to come, but overall, a fun day yesterday. Thanks for watching, guys. Please subscribe and like, and reach out to me on Twitter, of course, at MattSmithCFB. Have my written recap up at southernpigskin.com later today. And I will talk to y'all soon. See you guys.